Few events are more eerie than the unexpected sudden stop. Even more upsetting might be when the phone cuts off with an ominous cry at the other end. Or even more strange when the person at the other end seems to vanish literally without a trace, leaving nothing behind. Not their clothes, not their phone, not their keys, not their body. Gone completely without a trace. I would expect that it would produce a sort of Twilight Zone feeling where for just a moment you find your imagination wandering, calling up the specter of alternate dimensions or strange supernatural abductions, a reality you can't quite grasp. On May 14th, 2008, a 19-year-old college student walked into a field in rural Minnesota and simply vanished. His disappearance was sudden, complete, and baffling. It was so baffling, in fact, that nobody knows for sure whether it was a crime or merely a series of unfortunate events. Join me for the odd, strange, and mysterious story of Brandon Victor Swanson. So, just who was Brandon Victor Swanson? Well, he was a college student from Marshall, Minnesota, who lived with his parents, Brian and Annette. In May 2008, he visited friends in nearby Lind and Canby to celebrate the end of another semester. Brandon was a bright young man with big dreams. He just completed his second semester of classes in the local wind energy program. He was thinking about transferring to a state school. He had no history of mental illness, drug use, or alcohol abuse. The media and investigators have never reported any enemies or secrets. There's just one whisper of trouble, a third-hand hearsay report that Brandon argued with someone at one of the parties he attended that night. Nobody knows who, nobody knows what, and nobody knows how intense the argument was, if indeed it happened at all. Here's what investigators do know. Brandon had driven the route between Canby and his Marshall home many times, but most days he used the main road between them, State Highway 68. His friends say he was lucid and in control, that he'd only had perhaps a shot of whiskey at each party, but he may have been nervous about encounters with cops all the same because on this fateful night he chose to take an alternate route, turning onto the rural farm roads to make his way back home. He may even have had cause for nervousness. There's a possibility that his friends were downplaying his intoxication levels in the hopes of shielding Brandon from trouble, a truth we may never know. Either way, switching up his route was the first odd decision Brandon made that night. He must not have turned on his GPS because by the time he accidentally ran into a ditch, his sense of where he actually was hopelessly wrong, apparently. He believed he was close to the town of Lind, close enough to walk back if he wanted to do so. In reality, he was closer to a town called Porter, roughly 20 miles from where he thought he was located. His cell phone was functioning fine because it played a key role in this story. He had plenty of battery and plenty of signal. Google Maps had been available for 3 years prior to this event. Maybe he thought he knew the area well enough to do without it, or maybe programming a route into a cell phone wasn't quite second nature then, the way it is now. Once in the ditch, his car's wheels were elevated. Not sure if this is considered high-centered or grounded, but there was no getting the vehicle to move without a tow truck, so he called his parents and asked for a ride around 1:54 a.m., giving them his best guess about his location. He saw lights in the distance. He said, lights that he was sure was coming from the town of Lind. But of course, his parents were looking for him in the wrong place. As they drove around, both Brandon and his parents flashed their headlights and honked their horn. Brandon grew increasingly agitated over the phone as their inability to see one another frustrated everyone involved. Tempers flared, and Brandon even hung up on his mother at one point. When she called back, he apologized and then said he was just going to walk to Lind. There was a nightclub near his friend's house, and he said he'd meet them in the parking lot. It was at this point that Brian decided to bring Annette back home because they were sure to meet Brandon in the agreed upon parking lot. Then he made another pair of strange decisions. First, he left all his car doors open. Second, he left his glasses in the car. Brandon was legally blind in one eye and had depth perception issues that would already have been dangerous when walking around alone at night. I don't understand why he would leave his glasses behind. Had they come off when his car went into the ditch? Had he been too frustrated to remember to bring them along with him? Did he think he wouldn't need them? It's certainly an odd decision for someone like Brandon to make. Strange decisions gave way to bad decisions when Brandon decided to cut across a field. He might have been fine if he'd taken his walk down the shoulder of the road, findable by someone, or even finding his way back into Porter, where he would have had better landmarks to offer. Perhaps he didn't realize that even a field can have significant hidden dangers in the night. Brandon remained on the phone with his father for 45 more minutes, walking and talking, it seemed. But then the night and their telephone call took a strange turn. He said or yelled, "Here is where some accounts vary. Brandon says, 'Oh no, not another fence,' and then unexpectedly, 'Oh shit.'" Suddenly, the phone went dead. When his dad frantically called back, Brandon wasn't answering. His startled shout contained the last words anyone would ever hear from him. Ever again. Annette and Brian began to feverishly contact Brandon's friends, asking for help. Even in the middle of the night, several of Brandon's friends arrived to help search gravel roads and farm fields to see if they could find Brandon. They were never successful. At 6:30 a.m., Annette called the Lynn Police Department to report her son missing. As has been the case in many missing person stories, the police initially brushed off her concern. Brandon, they said, was an adult, and it was every adult's right to go missing. Then, as Annette pushed, she ran into some jurisdiction friction. Brandon had gone missing right on the county line, and police weren't sure which police department or sheriff's office was responsible for handling the problem. Brian and Annette were frantic, insisting their son had disappeared under dangerous circumstances and that he had not willingly disappeared. At last, the police relented and joined the search. They started with Brandon's cell phone, which was still functioning. They triangulated the location of his last call and pinpointed the nearest cell tower. That's how they located Brandon's green Chevy Lumina, still stuck in the ditch off Lyon Lincoln Road between Porter and Taunton. There were no signs of foul play. By now, calls to Brandon's phone were going straight to voicemail, prompting police officers to begin an extensive search. Soon, air surveillance raced across the area as police dogs supported a group of over 100 volunteers. A canine unit led officers roughly 3 miles from the ditch to the Yellow Medicine River. The river was flowing high and fast. The 2-mile stretch of the river takes nearly 6 hours to walk, but by now the team was committed. One of the tracking dogs picked up Brandon's scent. He led them down a long gravel trail towards an abandoned farm, which also led back to the river. The dog jumped into the water, jumped back out, and then tracked along another gravel trail before ultimately losing the scent. While investigators were quick to suggest Brandon fell in the river, this seems impossible. Eventually, Brandon's body would have washed up downstream, and it never did. Investigators have never found anything of Brandon's. Not his cell phone, not his clothing, not his jewelry. Investigators even rushed back to the Yellow Medicine River in the fall of 2021 after a drought dried it up. It was a new opportunity to attempt to gain some answers in the case, but the investigation of the dried-up riverbed ultimately produced nothing at all. Another theory is that there were several unmarked cisterns in fields throughout the area. For those that don't know what these are, like me, the Minnesota Department of Health describes a cistern as this. The term cistern is often used to describe any below-grade, non-pressurized reservoir that provides water storage. Other large, Below-grade tanks or reservoirs may be used to store drinking water from approved groundwater, treated surface water, or hauled water sources. However, the Minnesota Department of Health discourages their use. There was a chance Brandon fell in one. It was also just under 40 degrees that night, so if he got wet at all, he might have succumbed to hypothermia. While some have suggested that Brandon orchestrated his own disappearance or suffered from some sort of mental breakdown, evidence for these theories is scant. Given that Brandon was on the phone with his father the entire time he was trying to get back to civilization, it seems unlikely that he didn't want to be found. It's even possible that Brandon ran into someone that night, someone who took him by surprise. A farmer who saw a trespasser and so struck first and asked questions later, perhaps, then panicked when presented with a body, an opportunistic vagrant, even a wild animal. The investigation has been hampered by several factors. First, there's no probable cause to search any private property. Investigators must obtain a warrant, which a judge won't authorize or sign, or farmers must give permission. Often, farmers are wary of letting canine units onto their territory or of allowing police to conduct a search. Some have blocked searches altogether. A handful have helped out by walking their own lands in search of clues, but others have simply closed their doors and barred the way. In addition, most of the hope of finding Brandon's body boils down to the dogs, and Lyon County has just 3 dogs available at any given time with the training to conduct this kind of search. It is therefore possible that Brandon's body will never be located. What do you think may have happened to Brandon? Does one of these theories sound stronger to you than any of the others? Determined to ensure something good came out of Brandon's disappearance, Brian and Annette began campaigning for the passage of a new Minnesota state law called Brandon's Law. On May 7, 2009, just 1 year after Brandon's disappearance, former Governor Tom Pawlenty signed the bill into law. The law requires law enforcement to take a missing persons report without delay when they receive a notification of someone who is missing, and they went missing under dangerous circumstances regardless of that person's age. The investigation must now begin immediately. In addition, the law clarifies which agency will lead these investigations. While there has been plenty of speculation about kidnapping and murder in Brandon's case, nobody has ever found so much as a shred of physical evidence to support the idea, at least no shred of evidence that has ever been reported in the media. So why does Brandon have an entry in VICAP? VICAP is an FBI resource. It stands for the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. It includes an entire database of missing persons, but not usually missing persons who are thought to have died nonviolently from causes like hypothermia or falling into a river or a cistern. Did someone add Brandon's story to this database out of an abundance of caution? Is it somebody's belated attempt at CYA, given law enforcement ignored Brian and Annette's initial calls for help? Or does some investigator somewhere think there is more to the story? Will we ever get the opportunity to know the true answer to this odd mystery? Back in 2008, Annette Swanson said that her greatest fear is that people will forget her son. She said, "I want people to remember Brandon. To talk about Brandon, Brandon is a real person. He touched a lot of lives, and don't forget him. He has a smile that lights up his whole face," his mother said. "And he is big-hearted and kind and really believed in doing the right thing." Mrs. Swanson, I hope this story about Brandon meets with your approval. Not only do I understand, but my audience is so empathetic to stories like Brandon. I would like to believe that channels like mine help even in some small way. Ultimately, my hope is that you your family, and Brandon's friends receive the closure you seek. Thank you. My name is Vince. If you enjoyed this strange, odd, and mysterious story about Brandon's disappearance, you might also find the strange disappearance of Tammy Lynn Leppert just as interesting. You can go right to that story now by clicking on the box on the top right corner of your screen. Remember, until next time, stay odd and mysterious. Thank you.